Carpe Diem VPN. Seize the data.
Today we're going to talk about studying, learning, and how I try to figure stuff out. Just went through this with Terraform, and I thought it'd be a good chance to sit down, try to document how I go about learning something new. Obviously, the context and subject matters a lot here, so I would say generally I take around 7 or 8 definitive, distinct steps, try to figure something out. Do a lot of hopping around as I try to get versed and fluent in things, so it tends to be a lot of what appears to be chaos, but it makes sense to me. Well, let's look at the general flow, and then I'll apply it to how I set out to learn Terraform and AWS networking. Spoiler alert, I'm not an expert at either of those yet, even now. Okay, step 1 seems obvious, but it's important. When you first hear about something and you want to try to figure out how to learn something new, it helps to just start with the overview. It seems obvious, I know. But it's really important that before I get too deep on something, that I spend some time to understand kind of what the point of that thing is. What is the problem that it's solving? Why does it exist? Why does anyone care about it? You know, at this step, I'm not really interested in the technical details beyond just maybe just a really high level kind of slideware PowerPoint version of how the solution works, because context is what I'm looking for, right? If I don't understand why the thing exists, I have a harder time trying to understand it technically, and maybe that's just me, but it really means a lot. So to me, it's more like I had a puzzle piece and I had no picture to look at to see where that puzzle piece might go. So, you know, that the context and the overview and everything kind of helps fill in and create that picture for me. Step 2 is just extending step 1 a little further, broadening the sources out a little bit. So in step 2, I take what I learned in step 1 about it and around the purpose and the context, and I start thinking about how you get started with learning this thing. And I start thinking about how you get started learning it in kind of in earnest. I usually read like the summary of the documentation at this point, which is to say I'll open up a doc about it from the vendor's website or something and just read through it, but not actually spend any real time truly reading it, right? I'm looking at the headers, I'm looking at the big bold print, I'm looking at, you know, the table of contents and kind of the blueprint of the solution, if you will. I'm not actually digging into any specific details at that point. Again, just trying to paint that picture a little bit, get some lines around what it is we're learning. So if it's like something that has like a step through series of tasks to make the thing work, I'll go to the YouTube, look for a YouTube video about it. Just kind of, again, I'm really just trying to get a mind's eye view of what the point of the thing is, like where, you know, kind of how you start setting it up or start learning it. By step 3, I've got a very basic plan of attack. I understand the context, the purpose. I've seen some examples of some very basic things. I know enough that I know how to start learning more, how to start actually attacking learning this thing. So at this point, I'm looking for, like, are there tutorials? Are there guided labs that I can do? YouTube searches are getting a little bit more specific about how do I actually build this thing, or what's the best way to learn this thing? Because rarely do you find that you're the first person to try to learn something. So that's where you start really getting specific about how you start learning that, right? You've learned the context, you've kind of learned the basics of step 1, step 2, step 3 of the thing that you're learning. And now you're actually starting to get serious about, okay, well, now how do I actually get my hands dirty? You know, if I'm getting tutorials and guided labs at this point, I'm actually already, as I'm going through these labs, as these tutorials, I'm starting to think, okay, well, I'm learning this, but it's a little bit paint by numbers, and I'm already thinking about where I'm going to start stepping off the yellow brick road, and where am I going to start pivoting away from the guided lab and the guided tutorial and start adding new stuff and start learning stuff that they're not showing me. Step 4 is the part where I've kind of learned to start attacking it on my own, or I've learned enough. You know, I've gone through the guided labs, I've gone through the tutorials. I know enough to know what I'm missing. What did they not show me? What feature solution part of the product was not part of the tutorials? What's the next thing that I need to learn? How do I, and then because I've done the guided labs and I kind of start identifying what are the gaps, and I can start thinking about, okay, well, I know this much and I know where I'm trying to get, and I know enough to start bridging those gaps based on what I've already done, the work I've already put in. This is usually where I start hitting walls, by the way. You start hitting walls, you start getting stuck because, of course, up until now, it's been a very guided effort. Everything's been well documented. Everything's more or less been handheld. Someone's holding your hand virtually through the whole thing. Hopefully not physically, but I guess that could work too. But you're off the beaten path, right? You're trailblazing a little bit. Certainly in trailblazing your own training at this point. Unless the vendor has like a full zero to hero type of thing, right? Obviously that doesn't apply. You're still, in that case, you're still on the yellow brick road that the vendor has set up for you. This is what I'm talking about, is bridging gaps with stuff that doesn't have training readily available. So far I've followed a path that's gotten me to the point where I know enough about the product or whatever it is that I'm studying that I feel confident being able to step off the yellow brick road and more importantly kind of know enough to know the pieces that I'm missing and can build towards that. And like I said, this is often where you get stuck. This is probably the first big hurdle that anyone will run into when they're trying to learn something. You know, a lot of people hit this wall and they really struggle to get over it. And it's always a fear that's probably been there from the beginning, right? Anytime you think about, I'm going to learn something new, kind of in the back of your head, always like, oh, well, what happens if you can't figure it out? What happens if you can't learn it? What happens if you hit a wall and there's no answer and you feel like you wasted that time? And what happens when you get stuck? There's no instructor to tell me what I'm doing wrong. What do I do? So, I mean, the truth is, of course, there's plenty out there, and you can get over that wall. But this step 4, I say, tends to be, weed out people from a casual interest to like people that actually really want to push beyond that and figure out how the stuff works. Step 5 is, I usually start step 5 around the time where I start hitting the walls, like the big ones, not the little stub your toe kind of walls where, I just didn't find the right document or something and I couldn't figure it out, but I had to go find the right document. Like, that's not a wall. To me, that's like stubbing your toe and, I got to go somewhere else and figure it out, right? A wall would be like, it's broke, it doesn't work, the thing you tried is just completely not happening, and it's Greek when you're reading the error messages, and you were just absolutely stuck. So this is where I usually, and my guess is, no matter what you're learning, at some point, again, unless you're being handheld through the entire process, this is going to happen. So usually once I start hitting those kind of walls, I actually put a full stop on my progress and I reevaluate. I figure out the parts that I've done well. I kind of circle back around to the beginning a little bit and kind of re-verify, find my footing, find my stability. But then more importantly, I go back to the labbing I've already done. I go back to the progress I've already made, and I think about how can I optimize it. Because what the likelihood is that you're going to end up, if you're getting stuck, like really stuck, the likelihood that you're going to have to repeat some processes to find out how to get past this block is really high. So by step 5, I'm usually trying to figure out, how do I optimize this? How do I make it easier and faster and quicker to, tear down something and rebuild it quickly, or to shift quickly, or to move on to the next trial of things that I want to try more quickly. So that actually saves time in the long run, depending on how long you get stuck on things, especially. But I've never, even, especially when I was studying for my CCIE, was using the INE version 5 workbook, and anyone who has those materials knows that the workbook is gigantic, and every single lab, hundreds of labs, has a different configuration. So those are all different router configs. Sometimes they overlap, the router config itself doesn't change, but maybe what you do in the lab changes or something. And even then, you got to be able to reset the config quickly so you can move on to the next lab, and you're not spending 20 minutes changing configs. And so with that one, I saved all the configs per lab, named them, everything, loaded them up in my lab, loaded them on the routers so that I could quickly do a config replace and switch between them. And that probably took me, 3 hours to set up. But in terms of how much time it saved me in labbing versus having to sit there and copy and paste configs between labs, I can't even imagine the ratio on that. It was absolutely insane, right? So that's my suggestion, right? When you really get stuck and you know that you're going to have to end up repeating a lot of effort, especially to find your way around where you get stuck, go back, re-verify, find your footing, and optimize the whole thing. Because up until now, you've probably been kind of breakneck towards the goal, whatever that goal is that you're trying to learn. So just take that as an opportunity. So step 6 is kind of how I scrabble over those walls. Identify where I'm stuck, start figuring out the plan of attack. By the time I get to, like, say, step 6, which is where we're trying to get past these blocks, I know enough about what I'm studying that my Google searches for solutions usually is much better. So I'm not Googling, like, it's broke, how do I fix it, right? I'm Googling specifics, and I understand the solution well enough, whatever that is, right? With solution, product, feature, whatever it is, I know enough that I can craft better Google searches. And I know I've said Google like 20 times already, but I think we all can appreciate that really is a huge part of how we learn things and how do we diagnose things. Sometimes you won't find an answer on Google. Sometimes you're literally going to be sitting there, like a scientist almost, doing trial number 1, trial number 2, trial number 3, and changing little things and just seeing what the result of those changes are. And even when the result isn't that it's working and it's fixed and you're on to the next thing, usually you can even use what broke, how it does it differently based on what you're changing, to kind of feel your way around a little bit towards the solution, right? The error message will change slightly, and now you've got a new error message to Google, stuff like that, right? And of course, always use your networks. And of course, I'm not talking about like the network. I'm talking about your network of people. Reach out to people that maybe they're working on this too. Study groups are great for this, right? See if they've hit the wall, if maybe they've hit different walls. Maybe they're trying to scale your wall and you're trying to scale their wall, right? They're not hitting the same problems. There's a huge value in having a network you can reach out into. And I know it's really easy to just get discouraged on step 6, especially if that answer doesn't seem to be coming. And all I can say is that the struggle is integral to the process of learning something, of really learning something, right? Because if you think about it, go back to your tutorials. Your tutorials, they say, okay, click this button, click this button, click this button, and this happens, right? And even if they give you 4 paragraphs saying how it works in between all of those things, at the end of the day, you're following directions, and it's never going to stick in your head the way it will when it's broke and you have to fix it. So it's not wasted time, is the point I'm making. Nothing else will teach you how something really works than when it's just broke and you don't know why and you got to figure out how to fix it. Like, that's totally integral to the process. So don't skip it. Try to work your way through it. All those walls, if you see another wall, you scale that one too. And I promise when you get over those walls, it's going to be worth it. So step 7, where the point where you've worked through some of that, hopefully you're not just hitting wall after wall, and there is a point where we've got much closer to the goal that we have. It's attainable. I promise. You can get there. Outside of like software bugs, unsupported features, broken infrastructure, right? With enough work, anyone can get past the hardest problems and move on. And this is the part where you start expanding outward. You've struggled, you've succeeded, you've gotten past the biggest hurdles, and you have something that is pretty close to where you want it to be, or at least that a lot more about that thing. This is the part where you start expanding outward, like add something in. If you figured out how to build, use network automation to build a network, for example, add in something new that wasn't part of your original, but not something random, right? Something that matters, something that's integral to the whole, integrates with the process. Just keep improving and increasing your usage and adding things in within reason, of course. Don't add like 20 things at once. Probably one at a time. Just start, and even that process will teach you a lot. Increase that understanding of not only what you're studying, but its kind of place in the technical cosmos, or the ecosystem, if you will. So this is the part where you kind of have a pretty good understanding of the thing that you're studying, and now, okay, where's its place in the world? And you start bringing some of that other stuff in. Just expand outward. Okay, step 8. When I get to step 8 is not even really a step, but kind of. So that's where I said, okay, well, here's my victory conditions. Here's where I consider myself technically proficient with this thing. I'm not an expert. There's still going to be plenty to learn. There's going to be lots of corner cases. There's going to be lots of extra features that, haven't seen yet. There's going to be other stuff. So step 8 is where I say, okay, I am technically proficient with this. And that has to be whatever that thing is that you're learning. You have to identify kind of a solid, attainable goal, because otherwise you're just chasing after it forever. You're climbing a mountain with no end. And you can't just say, I'm just going to become an expert, because where do you put the flag, right? So there has to be a point where you say, okay, I've done this thing. I've created this network, whatever it is. I've built this from scratch. and I can come back, I can revisit this, I can do the extra use cases, I can do the extra features, I can work on the corner cases when I need them, but I can say that I'm fairly technically proficient at this thing, or I know this thing, whatever. I can go deeper as I need to, but this is good. So having that victory condition lets you know when you reached it and when you can move on to other things, or when you can say, hey, I've actually learned this thing and I'm not an expert at it, but I can assimilate new things, pull in new things as needed, especially as things change, right? I can come back to this thing and I can assimilate into it.